Hi everybody, thank you Chris and Richard for such an amazing visual, spectacular. I just came on very last minute last night, so forgive me if I'm slightly underprepared. But why don't we start with talking about how this project came about for both of you?
Do you want to go first?
Well, I remember being in a hotel room in Norwich working on a commercial for something, and I think I've been sent a script, and it had all just suddenly came out of the blue, and I loved the script, and I had a Skype call with Vaughan, and I knew Chris was on it, and it was happening in Hungary immediately. I think I was going to have to go out there, the next week or something like that. I think funding had suddenly come together, and Danny Gallagher was on it, on me as well, and I'd done a film in Hungary in Budapest the year before, so it just sort of happened. I love the script. I love the opportunity of creating a world like that. It's not something that often comes along, and so I kind of jumped at it, and I don't remember how much prep we had, but it all happened very quickly.
Yeah, it's like 6 weeks here or something.
Yeah, something like that.
So I'd worked with Vaughan before I shot a film called Dad's Army, a remake of the TV series, and Vaughan at the time was paying the bills by working in the AD team, and we got talking in between setups and evening and that kind of thing, and he had this idea for a script for a big, was a series of scripts based on the world of Terminal. And he was looking to make a short film just shortly after we wrapped on Dad's Army to get funding and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, that, as it turns out, that short film didn't materialise, or got busy anyway. And then 6 months later, Margot had jumped on board and had brought Simon Pegg with her, and that triggered the money. And yeah, that was it. I was in a similar position to Richard, really. I knew that I was going to probably be doing the film at some point, but then the phone call came, and it was we've got the money, and Margot had like a 25-day window in her schedule between one massive movie and another, Suicide Squad and Legend of Tarzan, and that was it. Triggered the cash, and we put out. And yeah, I think I had about 4 weeks prep. It was probably 6 or something. Yeah.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you guys prepped together, how you came up with the visual world that we've just seen, and what are your references?
Yeah, never speak, keep everything a secret.
Yeah.
No, so we worked together. So Richard and I worked together 3 times previously, at least. Yeah.
More than that, maybe. Sex and Drugs, Rock and Roll.
Yeah.
Spike Island.
Yeah, and Blackout.
Blackout.
Yeah. And so it was quite easy to start the conversation. So Vaughan began by sort of, I guess, bombarding us with ideas for the creation of the world, which was sort of, part Blade Runner, part The Crow kind of thing. And then you probably brought one, a lot of Fight Club. Yeah, you probably brought one from The Hearty.
Yeah.
I probably brought American Friend. And Barfly maybe, and then we just started. We landed in Hungary, in Budapest. And what's great about Budapest, although if you're an aficionado of American feature films that shoot in Hungary, you'll see a few repeated locations.
Yeah.
But it's trying to go to those places and see something new, kind of thing.
And it was interesting. Hungary led us in a bit of a direction as well, didn't it? Because it's got a specific look. Budapest, sort of. It was obviously Eastern Bloc, and we ended up imagining that Terminal was happening in kind of in London, but in a version of London where the USSR had sort of spread at the end of the Second World War, and that kind of Eastern Bloc architecture and economic system had sort of spread to London and kind of deteriorated. So that's how we sort of imagined the world a bit, mixed in with lots of other influences. And then Hungary was great because things like the neons you can get made there very cheaply, well, comparatively cheaply. And so it took us in a direction that I think it otherwise wouldn't have gone in. I think it would have been a different film if we'd made it in London.
Yeah, when I first read the script, Vaughan was trying to get it off the ground in London. As far as he was concerned, everybody, the architecture existed here, but principally the cast that was going to be working on the film was based in London. So there was a big pressure from the financiers to do it here. But after scouting a few places, it became apparent that you can find one really amazing facet of a building, but the other direction is, Canary Wharf or the Gherkin, or so you can find this sort of either this like Welbeck Street brutalist architecture, but opposite it has got denims. So it's kind of fulfills the brief in one direction and then scuppers you in the other. And taking the project to Budapest really opened it up in a way. There are very few, that the terminal of the where the cafe sits is a disused building in the centre of Budapest that's the size of about 4 football pitches in size, and it used to house a train engineering works, but it was just sitting there. So
how many locations, or was it all contained within that terminal space, or how did it work in terms of the set builds? And it's got this sort of exterior feeling, but it feels like a lot of it is actually interior, or like at least enclosed. So maybe talk a bit about that.
Yeah, it was a lot of it happened in that big rail shed. It had these existing raised kind of, I guess they were sort of observation rooms, and Vaughan came up with the idea of turning that into one of the cafes. So we used that for the exterior, and then we built the interior in another section of the shed that we blacked out because the actual building was too small. We had the little place we were using as a cafe. And we sort of built it was kind of an exterior-interior set as well, wasn't it? We doubled the exterior on it, so you could get the coming and going and move into the space. And you could float the front panels off it as well, which did a couple of times. And it was fun. It was a really fun. That was, when I think back on it, the whole thing was quite a fun job. There was a lot of interesting stuff to do, even though it happened very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it's very creative. You both have sort of put a lot of work into making a completely different style. Maybe as we're at the BSC, you should talk a little bit about what camera package you're using, what lenses, maybe lighting.
I use lights, lots of them. I left lots of them in shots. I don't know whether you noticed, but there's like park cans and mull beams and 10K. We didn't have a huge sum of money, so it's almost entirely a tungsten lighting package. Apart from the locker room, that was an interesting conundrum because the locker room was so big that we couldn't black it out, but we had to shoot Mike and all the scenes that were in that locker room we had to shoot during the daytime, basically, and we couldn't black it out because it was too big. So we blacked out the bottom 4/5 of the windows, and then that was the only HMI set. So that's got 5 12Ks pointing in to try to be so in the daylight flooded world. The 5 12Ks take the place of 5 5Ks in the tungsten scenario. But shot digitally on Alexas, SXTs, I think they were, with a wonderful set of lenses that I first discovered when I worked at Panavision, and Mr. Phil Mackey was using them on a film called Entrapment at the time, called the Cook Crystal Express anamorphic lenses, and they're really beautiful and forgiving and full of character. So you can't. One of the things I really love about those lenses, but anamorphic lenses in particular, is the way that you can quite easily make the world affect the characters. So by leaving a practical in shot that's just over someone's shoulder, you see the light, the flare bleed into their shoulder, or when somebody interacts with a light source, you get the horizontal zing. It's it's a well used trope, but I think it in a kind of Blade Runner way, it creates a world in which the characters are totally immersed in the place that they inhabit, rather than a sort of a lit character in a lit space. That was the kind of the idea, to try to take the edge off of everything and unify it. And those lenses definitely sort of give that unifying feel, I think.
What about the colours for both of you? I mean, how did you collaborate in prep and on set? Did you ever talk about it?
We did a bit, I think, didn't we? I mean, the colours of the neons was our biggest kind of crossover, I think. I remember being worried when I was watching the Russians that I tend to go for some quite dark colours in general. And I remember watching the Russians and thinking, oh my God, you can't see the only colour you can see is the neons. But it's lovely watching it back on the big screen, because you see everything else that's going on. It's a problem actually sometimes when you just see things on a little screen, or actually watching Russians on res. You don't get anything. So it's fantastic to see that. But I think we were kind of instinctively a little bit going in the same direction because of the references and stuff like that. And I think I probably offered a few samples here and there.
Totally. There was you did like the 4 different versions of the apartment space, wall colour kind of thing. Yeah. And then there's one of the things that Richard does on his sets, which I really love, is the glossing, the varnishing, the glazing on the, which means that you can basically light a set with a 60-watt bulb and a wall, and it just has a real great texture and feel to it.
Gives it a bit of life, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Takes away from the flatness.
And also, what's amazing is, also the hair and makeup and the costumes play with that as well, and the red coat, and picking out the different way you want to be looking on the screen, and considering it such a short prep time. Did you guys have much time with hair and makeup testing, costume, or?
We did. The hardest thing about when you're shooting pretty much any film, regardless of the budget, is the access to the actors. So on this particular project, Margot and her team were producing the film, and she's an incredibly open and giving performer who wants to deliver the sort of appropriate performance, and will do whatever she can to make the film, make it feel better. So we shot sort of a series of artist tests with her, the different costumes, the different different eye density of eye colours for whether we were in a wide shot or a close up, from the blue to the green.
Contact lenses.
Yeah. So I can't remember which one. Annie's got green eyes and Bonnie's got blue eyes, but it could be the other. Forgive me if I get it wrong. But we tested the neons, and we tested the technique for hiding Margot as much as possible during the dance routine, and being as mysterious and evocative for that as possible.
So how many days do you think you had for tests in general?
One. Maybe half a day. It was great. We had an entire one of Origo Studios. Origo's the studios in Budapest. That's the Pinewood of Hungary, and they found us a soundstage, the one soundstage that Blade Runner 2049 wasn't using at the time, but we were only allowed, because we didn't have any money, we were only allowed a sort of badminton court-sized area, and they came and they taped it off There's this huge, like, cavernous space. So I made sure that my light was outside the badminton zone, just to be a little bit rebellious. But yeah, no, there's not a huge. I mean, we didn't really have a pre-light. You know, because of the lack of prep, you guys were basically painting the cafe on the day that we were shooting the cafe. When we arrived, the Pratt sparks were still weren't still powering up the window, the freshener tubes and all that sort of stuff. You know, it's not a hugely budgeted film, and sort of European co-productions have a tendency, because of their how to say it nicely, because of their sort of manipulation of the tax credit structure in order to be financed. There's, you know, $4 million sort of vanishes pretty quick in the.
Do you think you guys would is there a benefit to working at that speed and pace and with those limitations? Do you think there's something to be said for that sort of having to be so decisive, or on another job? I'm sure you both worked on really big, I know you've worked on big budget TV dramas where maybe you have a bit looser. You know, what's the pros and cons of that style of working?
For me, I think it gives you an incredible momentum that you just have to, you know, gather everybody on board the train and go. And if you've made a mistake, then everybody carries the mistake and you know, keeps everybody on board the train. But there's no room for a kind of an anxiety attack where you doubt yourself or, you know, any of that. You just have to trust your instincts a little bit more and you know, it's weird. It's kind of exactly what, you know, if you analyse the how actors come and go on films, you know, they get a phone call and they might have a half an hour conversation with the director, and then they're never seen until they turn up that morning, go into costume, and they're like, oh, okay, this is what I'm gonna be. Oh, that's really good. And then they sort of sit on set and they're like, okay, and then they just embark. And so I think there's something fresh and vibrant about the sort of the danger of it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think if anything, it might steer you towards making stronger decisions because you can't really doubt yourself, and sometimes it does go a bit wrong. But I think it's an exciting way to work. So yeah, I agree with that. It sort of pushes you in an interesting way. Rather, in a way, you kind of don't want to take a safe decision because then you're out or something boring. So yeah, I think it forces your hand.
So if you if you were going to do this again and they had a much bigger budget, what is the one thing you would change?
I probably wouldn't say. Yeah, it's fine. We can do 16 motion control shots in a day. Probably wouldn't say that again. I'd probably say a day and a half. I don't know. It's hard to. It's like, you know, it's hard to post-rationalise. You know, the first film that I made, a little movie called London to Brighton, we didn't really have any money at all, and I think if we'd have had even double, you know, the film was made for sort of £60,000. If we had even double that money, we would have messed it up, because you just, you know, you start to think, oh, maybe I should get that light, or maybe, and instead of just sort of staying true to character and rolling the punches. I think filmmaking, you know, there's a you know, I don't think you know, an artist painting on a canvas, I don't think would ever consider that they were right about something, that every stroke that they made was entirely appropriate, but the strokes that they made, some of which may have been accidental, could have given some sensation of movement more than they could have done had they predicted what they were doing and predetermined it. And I think filmmaking often loses that vibrancy, that change of direction, that you're supposed to have all the answers, because you'd be a fool to think that you had half the answers, let alone all the answers.
Rich, would you change anything?
I was thinking about this the other day, and I don't think there is much I would do differently. There's a couple of little tweaks I do here and there, but I don't want to say anything.
Okay, so you mentioned motion control, and I know you said that this is one of the most technically challenging films you've ever made. Maybe talk about that and how to deal with twins.
Yeah.
They're not twins.
Yeah, sadly, there isn't another Margot Robbie, there's just the one. But it would have been convenient if there were two. But we knew that this end sequence was going to heavily involve the pair of them. And we wanted to make sure that the if you look at the script without the flashback structure cut into it, it's pretty much give continuous 6 or 7 pages of dialogue between the 3 characters. So it's like, right, okay, how do we, obviously we need to shoot some close-ups, and that's easy. Margot will be looking left to right in one close-up and right to left in the other close-up with different contact lenses. So that's a piece of cake. But it's how do we keep things sort of alive the rest of the time. And so what we did was the only scenes we really rehearsed were those ones in any great detail. So we had Margot being one of the 2 twins at any given moment. Charlotte, generally, who's Vaughn's assistant, playing Mike Myers' character. And then the actress that plays Chloe Merriweather, Katerina, she's a great friend. She lives in Slovenia, and she's a great friend of Margot's. They were in the Wolf of Wall Street together, and she's the other twin when it's over the shoulder or whatever. And so the idea was that we rehearsed the scenes with Margot playing one twin, rehearsed the scenes with Margot playing the other twin, and I was in a room we'd taped out with the same sort of layout as the room, and then I would operate we knew what motion control rig we were using, and I would operate a Canon 5D in the manner of a motion control rig to see whether or not, 30 feet of track with a 6-foot arm move. Does everybody know what motion control is? I just realised that there may be some.
Maybe explain it. I think there's quite a few.
Okay, so motion control is a type of cinematography whereby almost like you shoot real time, almost like animation. So a computer controls what the camera does in a repeatable fashion. So every frame, the dolly has a motor, so that every frame the dolly moves the camera an exact amount per frame, and if you move the head or the jib arm that is attached to the motion control rig, it repeats the move exactly. So you program the move and try to make it, it's basically like a robotic arm that welds cars together. So as you can imagine, it's not the most sort of human of camera devices. So to try to make the move soft and fluid with an actor is a really difficult thing. So we rehearsed all of those moves in this space beforehand, and then on the day I could pre-program the moves without having. So while Margot was in makeup and getting ready in the mornings, I could pretty much get the move correct and put tape lines on the floor. And so that my favourite of the shots is there's a moment where she's got a cigarette in her mouth. She lights the cigarette, and if the shot continued as one, that's cut in one piece, she takes a toke of the cigarette. She starts walking. It tracks with her in profile. It transitions to Mike Myers. She puts the cigarette into his mouth. It then follows her across the room, and it picks up the other twin. And the other twin comes forward, and this is a different Mike Myers, not the Mike Myers that was in the original take, because it's very confusing. And she takes the cigarette out of his mouth and walks off. And that was probably the most complicated motion control shot in the that I've ever done even on commercials. But hopefully you didn't notice.
And how long do you have to do that with all the different costume changes and contact lens changes and all of that?
So we could only afford the motion control rig for 2 days. So we did, I think we did 12 shots in that room on one of the days, and sort of like 6 shots in 2 locations on the second day.
Fast.
Basically, pretty fast. You have to be fast, don't you? That's the way it is.
Just before we open it up, I was just going to ask you one thing about like shot listing and storyboarding, and to me this felt very like deliberate choices, and it also had the element of like a graphic novel, or sort of very fast-paced and very stylized. And I wondered how much time you guys, with the director and shot listing, and was that something that is just a style you decided on and you sort of spontaneously chose the frames as you went along, or was it something like the first sequence which is in the confession box and you've got that close to the mouth, and you have these hard cuts, and how that came about?
Yeah, that first sequence was pretty much all sort of storyboarded, either storyboarded or shortlisted. I can't remember whether we actually drew any of the frames, but that was actually one of the things that we did on the test day, was to test the burning of the cigarette and whether or not whether or not her eye cut was too obvious. And the transitions for the suicides, they were kind of planned but not really storyboarded. But we knew that the first one was going to go through the counter, through the table down. We knew that the second one was going to track across and find them, and that narrowed it down. So that the third one was a pullback reveal. So we knew those 3. But the rest of it sort of came quite organically out of the process. I think we shot for 5 days in the cafe.
Was that all?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, and it was something like 8 pages a day to shoot with Bill and with Simon and Margot. And so it was kind of how do we knew that we wanted to jump the island at some point, and but yeah, so that was.
And how involved were you in that process, Richard? Is that something that it just comes to you when it involves the set, or changing the set, or floating a wall, or is it something that
it tends to be something that will come from Chris and the director. But we did talk about it quite extensively with that particular set, the cafe set, because there was so much in it. And there was that, I remember we were talking about it, and I had the instinct to build it wider than it was for practical reasons, and you unusually suggested actually bringing it back in smaller, which was a great idea. So it means you've got a really interesting frame looking in both directions. And so there were only so many angles you can get in that space, but I think it was quite a. I think we discussed it quite extensively, didn't we? Just the actual scale of it, just because if it had been a bit wider, I think it would have lost a bit of its charm.
Yeah. It's good that it feels like a tunnel.
Yeah.
I didn't feel that way when I had the 25mm Crystal Express, and anyone that has the pleasure of that lens will discover it's not quite as optically perfect as the rest of the set, but it's got some swagger.
Character.
So it's got character.
So I wonder if anybody has questions. There are 2 roaming mics. If anyone would like to ask a question. Can't see anything. Should I say a question? Oh, gentlemen in the shirt.
Hi, I was just wondering, when you had Margot and Simon in the cafe, what additional changes to lighting you've made when you were doing close-up on Margot rather than White?
So yeah, most of the time it's lit with the top light, the practical that you guys made above the table, and then it's either for the wider work it's a 2K through the window, and then for the closer work was a 1K refurb. So I tend to just, when going from a wide to a close up, tend to just try to make the source as big as possible. But sometimes it wasn't a doable thing because we were cross shooting and we had 2 cameras on every setup so that they could drift away from the real dialogue and into improv if they wanted to. So sometimes the close up and the sort of a wider 2 shot happen at the same time.
Thank you.
There was a question at the front here.
Yeah, so I wondered that quite a lot of a few of the wide shots, it looked as though there was a bit of CG involved. So I wondered what it was like as a cinematographer conveying what you wanted that to look like with the team behind that.
Yeah, actually, that's interesting because usually you embark on a project with a team in place. So you have a VFX supervisor and you will previs mostly because you have to budget what the VFX are going to be. But in our instance, the timescale between the green light happening and the film kicking off meant that we basically were doing it on our own. So the idea was that we would so quite a few of them are sort of the start of a crane shot. So they come into the building and then we do a takeover. And then a lot of them are sort of interstitial chapter moments. So when Vaughan had cut them into the film, or the idea of them into the film as blank screens, most of the plates of the various buildings were taken by me during either prep or the shoot or there's a couple that are just Central St Martin's because it was close, because I was on the film that I was working on when Vaughan was in post was centred there. So there's a couple of rogue actual London images. And it's in that instance it's quite hard to be sort of controlling, but I don't see that as necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, Vaughan takes over and puts in forward his demands and has the shots made, basically.
Any questions? Got another one here.
I was wondering, given that the script and the story draws inspiration from Alice in Wonderland, whether there are any sort of visual inspirations, because I noticed like with the club there was all the rabbits and stuff. I was wondering whether there was any more of that throughout the movie.
There was quite a lot, wasn't there? It was quite a theme, and actually there's not quite as much of it in the final product as I think the ones that we discussed in advance. But yeah, the Lapin Blanche, and there were quite a few characters made up as Alice in Wonderland characters in that club. But I don't know if you really read that many of them. You saw the Queen. Yeah. But there was a big guy smoking a hookah pipe, I think, wasn't there?
Yeah, he's the caterpillar.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty much that one scene is the scene where it's all together.
Yeah. The rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah, not in the reference. Yeah, the references weren't that overt. It's much more in the dialogue and the book that she carries away.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Well done for very impressive visual treatment. Superb, really. On the Internet Movie Database, it says that you had about 20 producers. How heavily they were involved and how many notes you were receiving for them, or was it between you and director and that's it?
I think there is a benefit to having that many producers, which means that they're tending to all, be financially connected to the film rather than creatively connected to the film. So really, for me, the creative producers of the movie were the Lucky Chap team, which is Margot, Tom, Josie, and Sophia, and David Barron, who was kind of overseeing Lucky Chap in their sort of fledgling. This was the first film that they produced, and then when they finished halfway through post-production, they began I, Tonya. they're quite a force to be reckoned with, and they were the creative lead, I think, and they backed up everything that Vaughan wanted to do. So it was, what was great is you could, you know, if Margot agreed with you that she should be in a silhouette, there was no question that you had to see her eyes. There was no second guessing. You know, you could do whatever we liked, which was which was great. Really.
They're very, very supportive of Vaughan's vision, weren't they?
Yeah.
And all these strongly saturated colors came from that circle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It was. I guess it was. It kind of comes from the sort of combined references. You know, I love the work of Robbie Muller, and The American Friend was a big reference, and Barfly was a big reference, and Storaro's work on One from the Heart, and yeah, it just felt appropriate that if you to generate, because I guess at times it's quite brightly lit, but it's quite it's pretty contrasting. So adding colour into the palette allows you to kind of add medium grey, but your medium grey happens to be you know, cyan or shocking pink. It kind of, for me, it helps to be kind of aggressive but neutral at the same time.
Any more questions? One at the back.
Speaking of color, I wanted to ask about the process with the DIT and the grading afterwards.
So I tend to have quite so I operate myself, and on this particular project, along most of my projects, I have a wonderful operator called Ian Mackay who operates Steadicam and the other camera, because it's sort of, you know, we hunt everything together kind of thing. And so I tend to use one lookup table for a project. It makes it easier when it's a project that has where you're going for a kind of unified look and a unified world, and you're not worrying about, you know, that you might have to time bright sunny day exterior to a grey exterior that happens side by side kind of thing. But I also like the idea of like the one, tuning your eye to the one thing. So there isn't really any time on films of this type to kind of go, oh, I wonder what it would look like with 3 points more magenta in that. You know, I don't have the luxury of going to the tent at all. So pretty much the film was, we had a DIT, but it was pretty much like a Rec 709 lookup table. And then one of the things that I do is I get a frame grab every setup from the DIT, just as a TIFF in Arri Raw. Well, you know, TIFF with no contrast added to it. And then once I've forgotten that I've made a film and I don't remember being in the room, I make like an 800 photo album of what I now think the film should feel like in the absence of the problems that you had on the day. So you go, yeah, what's the best way of looking at that scene, or the best way of looking at that? And then David Hughes was the colorist in Dublin, and we would bounce images backwards and forwards, and I spent about, I think, sort of 2.5 weeks in the grade. It's quite an extended grade because of recuts and all that sort of stuff. But that's sort of the process that I do on almost all my projects, because of the operating, I tend to trust your eyes, and yeah.
So you don't, in other films you wouldn't spend time with DIT on a day?
Only if they've got like a fun story. No, I find it. It's like you wouldn't stare at your light meter if you were shooting with 500 ASA film stock. That isn't a thing. So you learn that you learn that deeply underexposed areas are black and deeply overexposed areas are white. You learn your contrast curve of whether it's 5219 or 5296 or whatever it is, or an Alexa sensor at 800 ASA, and then
Was it 800 you rated this one?
Yes, yeah.
Did you add any grain in post?
No, that's mostly underexposure. Yeah, no, there's grain and the best bit of advice I was ever given as a DP. So the wonderful Vanessa Whyte BSC, before I embarked on my first film, said, no matter what happens, you can't use too much smoke. And that is, I continue to use that adage. Sometimes you can use too much smoke. That's definitely that is a definite thing. I tend to think about it more in a like thinking of the film in a global sense rather than thinking about just the shot that you're creating right now, and knowing that if there's a minor balance of green or magenta or whatever, then that's a very small correction. But it's the sort of the contrast and the punch and the colour and the sort of the swagger of the image that's going to be significant, not the appropriate exposure level. Many appropriate exposure levels turned out to be wrong in my youth. So now the inappropriate ones are the ones I look for.
Any more questions? I wonder if you want to speak briefly about shooting and lighting for 2 cameras, because
never do it. It's a nightmare. If a director says do it, just say no. Then you have to find another DP. It's a thing that with very short schedules happens a lot. On my latest project, actually, we have 3 cameras that we're planning on using every scene because we have so many characters in every scene. It depends on what director you're working with as well. Some directors would rather you have one sort of primary image that you are crafting, and then another image that will help editorially as a cutaway or whatever. Other directors want you to produce 2 sort of storytelling shots. Some directors like to mess with you quite a lot, which is fun. I've learned a lot in the last couple of years by jumping eye lines and making sort of quirky choices in the service of an edit, in the service of an unpredictable edit. So I think you kind of I think you have to ease back on your level of control and know that the important thing is not that the image is controlled, but that the image is sort of vibrant and contains the energy of the performance.
How do you change your working practice lighting-wise when you're shooting, maybe? Cross-shooting, for instance.
Cross-shooting, I have a bigger anxiety attack before we just turn over for the first time. Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things you can do is go for a top light scenario so that both characters have the same effective light source and exposure level, and I've been guilty of that on previous films. And if you like using backlight, then the backlight from one character becomes a front light on the other character, which is a disaster because everybody likes having 2 suns. So you basically have an emotional battle with yourself and work out if the director really wants to cross-shoot these two elements, then you kind of have to work out where it can go. And most of the time, you can't predict that place. So as you know, you'd like to pre-light every set. You'd like to have a real idea about every moment. But actually, sometimes you just have to react really fast and think on your feet, come up with a great solution. Use your, I had an amazing gaffer on this, Balashvaka, an amazing gaffer that I work with in the UK called Mark Clayton, who will always be there to offer the fastest solution, the fastest appropriate solution. And sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong. Sometimes you go, how do I replicate that? Because that was good, and I didn't mean to do, it didn't, this accidental bounce off of a wall or whatever happens. So yeah, I think, like I said earlier, I think control is a slightly overrated commodity in cinematography, and of course you have to be controlled. You have to be aware of the image that you're creating, but there you should let a little bit of the devil in, I guess. A little bit of Mother Nature, a little bit of a surprise, a little bit of yes.
Let the devil in. So that's a good
Yes.
way to end this Q&A. Unless anyone has any more questions, we can obviously thank you, and please join me in thanking Richard Bullock and Chris Ross.